Romance is almost a constant in storytelling. No matter the genre, it's not uncommon for there to be a romance subplot, let alone when romance is such a prominent figure in a story that it literally becomes the genre. It also, especially in storytelling, has a tendency towards the grandiose. But what about when it's used sparingly, snuck into hundreds of little moments across an entire season? A relationship that's so obviously progressing but never seems to have any breakthroughs. Well, mostly, but we'll get to that. Because somehow this navigates that very specific dynamic without ever feeling dragged on or played out. Welcome to a running series called Exploring Frieren. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about when romance is hidden right in front of you. Frieren's this show that flourishes in this weird dichotomy between being very slow-paced with tons of space, while also feeling incredibly dense, each episode filled to the brim with so many different significant moments. Part of this is built around this thing I call staggered episodes, where two different specific plot lines are explored in a single episode with a break in the middle, often providing resolution for the previous arc at the beginning. The episodes rarely ever feel like they have a clean break just telling one specific story. And while it's easy to focus on structural components of this show that make Frieren feel dense, in reality, the thing that makes it feel so full is more the substance. For maybe as long as storytelling has existed, so has parable, the use of stories to specifically teach morals or lessons. And I think that's something that Frieren offers outside of just entertainment that's really interesting, the fact that so many episodes feel like they're filled to the brim with wise and interesting information. Stuff worth dissecting on a human level. A really cool example of that exploration of the human condition and also that mix of density and space is in the way Frieren explores romance, specifically between these two characters. There are multiple significant romantic plot lines in this story that are worth talking about, but today we're focusing on one that I think is used incredibly efficiently, almost never stepping into the forefront and evolving in an incredibly natural and human way. Inspired character writing that is both embracing cliche and then also subverting it, this thing I've argued time and time again in my videos across the last year. The foundation of this character dynamic is incredibly formulaic. Two young characters who haven't had much experience with others around their age are part of an adventuring group together, and across time and experiences slowly feelings develop between the two. And while at times they're grappling with those feelings, unaware of them or denying them, the party members around them, and more importantly the audience, can see it clear as day. Because romance that is obvious is so often treated with a heavy hand, but the way this romance is explored is so delicate. There's this great video that I watched a while back called The Thing About Frieren. Not only have I literally taken inspiration from the structure of the video and sound design decisions, but also it's a topic I eventually wanted to talk about. My Exploring Frieren series is chronological, so there's certain ideas I've been sitting on for a while, so to see someone else come along and do such a good job exploring it, it's pretty cool. And even the primary hook, which is one specific scene, was what I wanted to talk about in this video, but we'll get to that in a second. Because one of the first points made in The Thing About Frieren is one I strongly agree with.
Frieren really is a story about exploring humanity. And the way it does it is through real human moments. Not big emotional moments, but rather with just these real everyday situations.
This show has an incredible knack for capturing the organic feeling of everyday life, while doing it in a fantasy story and world. The thing about Frieren is this scene, conflict between Fern and Stark. When the party's stuck in a cabin because of an intense snowstorm, Fern places an ice-cold hand on Stark's cheek. And because of this, Stark eventually does it back, and Fern gets incredibly upset with him. He struggles with what feels like, and in some ways is, a double standard, and Fern struggles to voice why she's so upset. This scene feels incredibly in touch with adolescent flirting, but the substance behind it that feels so real is the most interesting part. In working through the conflict, they figure out that what bothered Fern wasn't the ice-cold hand, but the other one that held her shoulder as he did it. Stark's character is a warrior who's incredibly strong, and to have that much force holding you in place would be terrifying. Social conflict in stories so often feels contrived, a result of unreasonable miscommunication or dumb decisions that seem to never make sense, but the thing about social conflict in Frieren is it always feels so organic. It's such a good representation of this larger thing that happens constantly. Conflict and struggle are often the byproduct of many moving pieces, and it can be hard, especially in the moment when you're having a strong reaction, to parse through your emotions and understand fully why you're responding the way you are. These little moments, just like The Thing About Frieren argued, are so important not only for the story but also Stark and Fern's romantic dynamic. And at the core of all of it is how natural the relationship feels. Not true to every teenager's experience of romance, but one that feels incredibly in touch with the types of characters that Stark and Frieren are supposed to be. Frieren's writing decisions are often very multifaceted, so Stark and Frieren's romantic dynamic very often falls to the background, being hinted at here or there. The story will occasionally drop into a moment showcasing their evolving relationship, but rarely is it ever the focus. Even in episode 14, where half an episode is dedicated specifically to conflict surrounding Stark getting Frieren a gift for her birthday. Even in that situation, it feels like Zine, by the way I've been pronouncing his name wrong, and his place in the party is more a focus than Frieren and Stark's dynamic. Most of the episode is viewed through his perspective, the resolution especially so. The peak emotional moments happening on a rooftop in the conversation between Zine and Frieren. I think Frieren and Stark's romance generally falls to the background, but I can think of one major exception. When the party finds themselves out of money, Stark is forced to impersonate a prince that he looks eerily similar to. And while this half-episode plot has lots of different interesting dynamics, the focus is how it eventually becomes about Stark and Frieren, a moment where both pretend not to be themselves, where Frieren looks at Stark like this. And while I imagine most understood what was going on, I wouldn't be shocked if some didn't notice. Like in this specific shot, you can see Frieren going from awestruck to smiling. This scene represents just how charming this dynamic can be. Frieren is a peculiar character who isn't very expressive. Her upbringing led to a pious, reserved nature, except for the fact that she was raised by a hider, so some of those morals are a bit skewed. Stark is sensitive and expressive, often unaware and doing his best. His initial fear is that Frieren actively dislikes him, given her natural inclination towards cold communication and high standards. But also he's incredibly charming because of his sincerity. The way these two are established and interact runs completely in line with how the two characters are built. And most important is there's inklings of chemistry, little moments where it's obvious they like spending time together. They're both seen throughout the series consistently putting effort into being kind to one another, and then often having to work through the growing pains that is being a teenager and then young adult. It's also very interesting how both of them were very isolated in their upbringing, not spending a lot of time around others their age. You can see both characters comfort with clear social dynamics, Stark in the way he's good with children, Frieren in the way she interacts with elders. So to see the two awkward around each other does the same thing that you want in a character. It gives the relationship interesting faults, ones you can build conflict around that doesn't feel contrived. Because with romance, erring too much on the side of perfect is first of all unrealistic, and second of all very uninteresting. Whereas if romance between two characters is too flawed, it's often hard to get behind and enjoy. Sometimes it feels forced and doesn't really make sense. I love these two characters' dynamic, especially in the way that it melds into the story. This show is like a beautifully woven cord, where layers and layers of different fantastic components are woven together so eloquently to build a beautiful singular product, each tiny moment leaning on one another, making a wonderful piece of art that explores romance, fantasy, and all the little moments that come with being a human.